I remember that. I remember once we became exactly like this. It's actually now. Not that we were not. Thank you.
All right, ball fans, how we doing this morning? Come on, guys. I know it's early. Just be louder, man. How we doing this morning? All right, guys. We're gonna start things off a little bit to get you guys awake this morning. Tennessee. T-E. Double N-E. Double S. Double E. Hoop. Tennessee. Come on. T-E. Double N-E. Double S. Double E. Tennessee, T-E, double N-E, double S, double E, Tennessee, last time, T-E, double N-E, double S, double E, Tennessee. Thanks, guys.
For being here. So thank you all for being here. 2018, right? So please use your cell phones. You never hear that in class, right? We have a hashtag this week, which is hashtag UTSMW18, which we'll use to track our conversation. So if you can't be here, you can always follow the conversation online via social media, okay? Our first session, we're a few minutes late starting, but that's perfectly fine. And our third panelist is here, he's parking. You all know how parking goes at UT, right? Yes. All right, so I'm going to turn it over, and we'll go ahead and get started because he's on his way in, okay? Thank you all for being here.
Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us again. This morning's panel, we're focusing on local media, social media, so we're going to be hearing from some folks who are affiliated in this local market, talking a little bit about how they're using social media, how they've seen it change their workplaces, their work environment, their workflow, and really talking to us about how they're using that for audience engagement, content distribution, and all of those things. And we're going to let our panelists sort of engage with a few key questions off the top, but we are hoping that that will prompt all of you to maybe be thinking of some questions you can ask when we open it up a little later in the session. I was trying to buy a little time for Jack, but he will be here momentarily. But let me go ahead and introduce the panelists we have. Bryce Caldwell at the end is an alum of UT and is currently the VP and GM at Raycom Media Knoxville. And he's worked in a variety of different markets. You've said big, small, kind of like me, done it all.
Yeah.
On the business and marketing side of things always, but in Knoxville, Nashville, Orlando. So he has a marketing and business management background. Annie Carr is also a graduate of our program, and she is an Emmy Award-winning producer at WBIR, which alone deserves a round of applause. Yeah, we're excited for you. So we thank you for being here. So she's going to talk a little bit about what social media looks like as part of her role producing. And then Jack will be joining us momentarily, and he is editor of the Knoxville News Sentinel, so he will be able to speak to how social media is factoring into print journalism and the world of newspapers. So let's go ahead and just get started. We'll let you all kind of dialogue a little bit. The changes that you have seen social media introduce into the world of television and other media platforms.
Yeah, well, I think personally this is an interesting topic, you know, when it comes to our business in general, because it always is such a moving target. I graduated in 2002, College of Business and Marketing, and I mean, that's not that long ago. And when I went out and immediately started working in broadcast TV in Nashville, I was actually working for a company known as Sinclair Broadcasting, and we operated 3 different TV stations in Nashville, and websites and social media, you know, certainly was out there, but it really wasn't that big a deal. And there certainly wasn't a really well-defined business model built around it, because no one was making money on their websites at that time, not really. And then obviously social media was just kind of getting started. You know, Facebook came out in 2006, so you know, it really was a very different model at that time. And so I think it's kind of interesting just to see how fast, you know, in 10 or 15 years, just how quickly it has completely transformed the way our consumers and our customers interact with our products. And personally, that's what I just think is really fascinating. It also keeps our job very interesting because it's, as we were talking about, it's a completely moving target. And what you do and what is successful today, my guess is will not be successful in 2 or 3 years. And so we all constantly have to adapt and change and kind of adapt to what our end users do. And really, this is kind of the age of the consumer, right? And so people, you guys and the population at large, how you use media will dictate, a lot of the tactics and the strategies that local media companies will use for years to come.
It's funny that Bryce talks about how fast things have changed. Also, excuse my voice, I have a sore throat. Because I graduated in December 2015, which was.
Would you like some water? 'Cause
I'm fine. Thank you. That was not long ago at all. I was hired as just like a producer. That's the job title that's like on my contract. 6 months after I started, now all the producers that are hired are multi-platform producers, which means that as soon as they start, they're not just a TV producer, they're a digital producer, and they learn everything all at once. And that was totally different from the training I got 6 months before them. So it really is something that just constantly changes. The way that we look at those metrics is different from week to week. Facebook just changed like an algorithm last week that has totally changed the way that like we can reach an audience. So it is constantly evolving.
Yeah. It's a great point too. I mean, Facebook changed, something was huge. I mean, it was a huge change in response to what is, big on everyone's radar right now in the wake of the elections last year. And this is their attempt to, start really regulating fake, quote unquote, fake news. And so I think, I don't want to speak for my other partners over here, but I think most people in the industry are very supportive of that. And, any clear delineation of real journalists versus, something else is a welcome change.
So Jack, we were asking while you were coming out, just sort of generally opening our discussion today with asking you all to speak to how social media has changed your workflow, the way that print journalism is done, has been done.
Well, first of all, my apologies for being late. I was actually here on time, but I was like, don't do that. Go straighten out your parking situation and come back. So I apologize. And print journalism, I think, could be the wrong description for what we're doing at the News Sentinel right now. We are really primarily a digital media newsroom. We look at print now as kind of a niche product that we spin out of our digital operation. And so all of the primary discussion every day is about digital. And I guess I'll just share a quick story about how this can immediately impact when the Gatlinburg fire was threatening. Some of you may recall there had been a lot of fires around the southeast, and then the fire had been burning in the Smokies, the chimney tops too. And that day there was a lot of smoke in Gatlinburg. And so we had a photographer up there, and we just thought this is just another kind of fire in the mountains type story, but the smoke is getting irritating, and so we didn't realize what was about to happen. And that evening I went home, and just about as soon as I got into my house, an app called Data Miner blew up on my phone. And it was like, I opened it up and started looking at these tweets of people shooting video of flames leaping up outside their hotel window in Gatlinburg. And so naturally I hopped in my car, went right back to work, and pretty much worked through the night. And so that's just an indication. Social media affects us in a lot of different ways. It's critical to how we gather news now, and we have tools that we use related to that. It's critical to how we disseminate news. And as it relates to the dissemination of news, it raises a lot of issues about how we handle branding and identifying where our news comes from, who we are, and how our journalists should handle their personal branding in the social media space. And then beyond all of that, it's the old question that we've been dealing with in the media for a long time of how are we going to make money as our business models get disrupted. And social media is a huge disruptor of the entire media covenant, I guess, with the public, or the media relationship of how information flows within our society.
Well, and so I was gonna ask next if you all, and you've maybe touched on these a little bit, some of the specific ways that you've seen your organizations or institutions adapt. An example I can share that I've shared with in classes is one of the newsrooms I was in literally reconfigured, this was a broadcast newsroom, literally reconfigured what would be the traditional setup of the newsroom where the assignment desk is sort of elevated and above. And at that point, the online producing pod was kind of off in its own little herd. They were reconfiguring the entire newsroom to put that online platform front and central and actually displaced the assignment desk to the back of the newsroom.
Yeah.
Revolutionary, and you've talked about job titles have changed, so maybe some areas like that where you have seen your organizations changing.
You want to start? Yeah.
The thing I think of most immediately is the way that our morning meeting works. So in a TV newsroom, you start every day with a morning meeting where you decide like who's doing what story, what's going in what show, kind of divvy stuff up. When I first started like 2.5 years ago, it was you go through like the assignment grid, you just send people to whatever was on your list. Now we start every meeting with kind of a digital breakdown. We talk about what did well yesterday or what did well over the weekend, what's doing well right now, what is starting to pop and will probably be doing well in the next like 3 hours. And I think that, which seems like kind of a small change, has really made a big difference in the way that we listen to our viewers.
Yeah, I'll hop in there. So I work for a large private broadcaster, Raycom Media, and we actually operate 65 TV stations across 8 states and 44 markets. And so, we have these conversations. It's really interesting. In fact, we'll have another one here in a couple of weeks where internally we're always discussing, what is that workflow? And I think it all starts and goes back to, as Jack mentioned, the social media really was a big instigator in disrupting our normal business model. Television's been around, print's been around for hundreds of years. Television's been around since the early to mid 50s, and incredibly, the model really didn't change at all for about 50 years. And we put news on the air, we put entertainment on the air, we had network programming, and we sold 30-second commercials during all that. And then what's happened is throughout the proliferation of social media and digital properties is that it's really created all these different outlets that people actually consume our product. And that's what I think is interesting, is that social media has become this new distribution network. And one that in the early stages of it, every broadcaster really struggled to, because we're all most of us are for-profit entities that take news and that that responsibility to deliver to our local markets information and inform and entertain. But what's interesting is that we've had to kind of adjust that to using Facebook, to using Twitter, to using now Instagram and Snapchat and Pinterest even as different distribution arms for our product. And so I think you've seen the advertising change with that, and certainly in the operations side of the business. I know in our company we've done very similar things where the digital desk and the assignment desk are essentially becoming one. And it sounds backwards and weird to say, but in the early days, you go to the air with it first, and then you'd say, hey, work on posting that story. Meaning that social media and your digital website, your actual website, might be getting the information after it was on air. And I think you're seeing all local media companies across the country right now really reverse that, get better at making. You hear the term digital first a lot in news gathering organizations. And I think what that means is go ahead, get the story out there, and then really broadcasting has kind of become not necessarily where news is broken, but where news is explained. And social media and the digital networks out there have kind of been where a lot of times you hear things first. And so I think that's kind of an interesting spin on how it's affected us really in like I said, just the last the last decade. I mean, it really wasn't like that too much long ago.
I'll sort of echo this a little bit too. Our meeting structure has been changed by the digital world. We actually start with a conference call at 7:15 every morning among the breaking news people and the digital producers and the managers of the different departments. And that's to deal with, okay, what do we need to be on right now? What's hot? What's TV got? What has happened overnight? What do we need to move on quickly? We meet again then later in the morning to make further plans, and the discussion is really just digital. The print discussions don't even happen in a meeting anymore. They're sort of like a conversation over the phone of put that there, put that there. The newsroom actually several years ago was laid out differently to put the focus on the digital, and we have a big grid, and I'm not actually checking my Facebook while we're talking here. I want to just pull something up by way of sort of an example. So we have a program called Chartbeat, probably others do as well, and so we have it posted on a big screen in the newsroom, actually a couple of big screens, where it lists how many people are on the website at a given time, what are the top stories, and the top story is the top one that's listed there, and how many people are on that story, and then the second, third, fourth down, and it moves around. And I was actually going to call it up and tell you what was on the site right now, but my wife is calling me, so I have to wait until this call passes. Not going to answer it. Sorry about that. Now we have Chartbeat apps, so we don't necessarily go out there and look. But so right now, top story on our site is a story we broke last night about that Knox County Schools had a threat at Holston Middle School, and they didn't. The police tried to contact the school security office, and they couldn't get a hold of anybody. And then also they tried to use the text message system to spread alerts, and they learned that it wasn't working. So, like, really stupid, bad breakdown in the system. So you can call up that particular story, and I'm sorry I could project this up there, but it gives you a little fever chart that tells you what percentage of the traffic is coming from Facebook, what percentage is coming from Google search, etc. And we roughly think that nowadays, and this is probably shifting because it does change so quickly, but as a rough rule of thumb, probably about a third of our traffic on our site comes from search, about a third comes from social media, and about a third is more organic, where people are going to the site. And so monitoring these metrics and keeping track of what's happening, different stories, like a story about school safety, what source do you think will be most important with school safety? Search, social media, or people coming to your site? Anybody? Which of those three do you think is more likely to hit, to be an issue, be a source of traffic about a story about public school safety? Social media. It's because the parents are passing it all around, and they're very deeply concerned. And so, it's not that you're, okay, if you got a story about Peyton Manning doing something, starting a NASCAR race or whatever, you might pick up more of that on search, because people search for Peyton Manning and it's a search term and such. But the things of this type that are touching people's lives and are tied into their network of connections, social media is tremendously important in and disseminating that news.
And so some of the areas we were talking about this morning that you all could speak to is how you're using social media to grow audience, engage audience. You've touched on the idea of distributing content, but if there's more to expand on there.
Engagement, I know, is like a big kind of social media buzzword, it seems like. With that Facebook algorithm change, one of the big things that they're trying to get from us, I guess, is engagement. They don't want us to just like post a news story and for people to read it. They want that news story to like start a conversation. So they want somebody to tag their friend, and for that friend to be like, oh my gosh, read the third paragraph, like that's crazy. And then they want it to share it, they want them to share it with their friends, and for their friends to share it. And they want it to be more engaging, because I mean, you watch TV, and as engaging and like casual and whatever as we try to make it, it's not a conversation, but social media can be. And I think that's kind of.
Absolutely, and I mean, for us, it gave us an opportunity to launch, and I mean, really, I don't think you would see this product without social media, but we launched about a year and a half ago a new media property here in East Tennessee called Knoxville Weekend. Has anyone heard of that? Oh yeah, so that's good, that makes me feel good. This was kind of one of my babies, and you know, I've lived, went to UT, moved away, came back to Knoxville a little over 10 years ago, and you know, like you guys, I'm looking for something to do on the weekends. And Knoxville is such a really cool place to live. In fact, there's a reason why so many students come to Knoxville and never leave. I mean, that's a very common thing here, and I'm in that category. And so I didn't feel like, and there used to be a 30-year publication called the Metro Pulse, which changed hands a few times and it went away. And essentially, we saw that and we said, look, we can be what the Metro Pulse is, but rather that for a new generation. And what it meant was changing how we produce content. Knoxville Weekend content, if any of you guys have actually ever been to the site, downloaded the app, or watched us on Roku, or even been to the desktop, which is this is what's crazy, is that that's a minority of our views and our user experience on the desktop. It's mostly with the phone, mobile, through the app. And so we created these what we call bite-sized videos, snackable video. These are all kind of buzz terms that people like to throw out there, but what it is it's short videos that are entertaining, and with our mission, it's showing you all the cool things to do on the weekend. Most of these videos are evergreen, so they live forever. They are just as relevant 2 months from now, a year from now, as they are now. And but we design those videos, and we produce content daily. I have an entire team. That's why we say Raycom Media Knoxville, Fox 43. And we actually partner with WBIR to produce 3.5 hours of news a day. And the other part that we do is all entertainment. And so Knoxville Weekend is certainly not as serious as news gathering. It is rather meant to be infotainment. And we designed it from the very beginning to be something that would get as many views on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest. We just started Snapchat. And so I have a MMJ who was just incredibly into Snapchat, and it's one of those things, right, that you when you take on a new strategy of being on a social media platform, you have to be there. You can't dip your toe in the water and then come back in 2 weeks. I mean, it's a commitment, and so for companies like ours, it's resources. And saying that we're going to have a presence on Facebook, we're going to have a presence on Instagram, and Snapchat means personnel, it means manpower, but we designed this entire video and this entire platform to be shared. And what's interesting is throughout our first year and a half in existence, that's what's been so incredible, is that we produce content that goes viral. And we even produce what's called native advertising, which this is a way that has been a source of revenue for our company and companies like ours, to where, we can create content, integrate an advertiser or partner's message naturally and organically into the message where it still is relevant, right? Everyone hates commercials, unless it's something you want. And then you're like, oh, what is this, And so that's kind of the mindset behind that, is that we're matching up people, because as you said, social media is engaging. Television is a passive media. You watch television and you listen to what they say. Social media, for it to really work for us and work for you guys, there's got to be that engagement and that sharing and that usage on a daily basis. So I think, Knoxville Weekend in its current format would not have existed 10 years ago, because you could not have made money in a platform like that. And now, because of social media, because of apps, and I think digital media and social media go really hand in hand, because you're a click away. You're one finger tap away from going to an app, from going to a mobile site, from going, and that's where I think social media has really just accelerated change in our business. It's because it's created more importance on those digital platforms that we have. As Jack said, your website, it wasn't that way, I'm sure, 15 years ago, although knoxnews.com was one of the first really major players there. But I think it's really exciting in that regard, because we get more interaction, and there's nothing scary about Knoxville Weekend. It's meant to entertain and meant to help people find all the great things about our community, and I think social media is really what kind of gives the oomph behind a product like that.
Can I do a real quick market survey? I just started curious. So, raise your hand if today you have been on Facebook. Okay. How about if you've used Twitter? Okay. How about Instagram? Pinterest? Snapchat? Okay.
I keep hearing about the Snapchat update. Is that terrible?
The worst thing.
Terrible? Okay.
Well, Facebook is still obviously a big dog. I was surprised to see the amount of Twitter hands that go up. We don't get a lot of traffic from Twitter referrals, mostly sports related, and but Twitter, obviously still very important, and Instagram, it'd be interesting to see how that survey works in a slightly different age demographic, because I think that Instagram is kind of coming on for a younger demographic, becoming more important, has improved some of the storytelling capabilities from our point of view of being used as a social medium. But the continuously changing environment, the change in the Facebook algorithm, and of course the algorithm is secret, right? Okay, we call it the secret sauce. What's Google's secret sauce? What's Facebook's secret sauce right now? Facebook, really. So what can you do to make something work better on social media? How are you going to use those platforms effectively? It's interesting. Another app that we use to kind of monitor Facebook and social media is something called CrowdTangle. And so every day I see local media comparison reports on CrowdTangle that shows how many interactions there have been on WBR and WAT, on the News Sentinel, on different, and how many posts each media organization has done on Facebook that day. how many posts do you think media organizations are typically doing on their Facebook pages each day? Anybody want to take a guess? Call out a number.
10.
Sorry?
10.
10? Okay. Well, the question is, what's the amount that Facebook algorithm will let you do without kind of punishing you for being spammy? And I don't know that anybody exactly knows that, but I think that we're all kind of playing with the same maybe guesses, because almost every one of the major news organizations is posting between 24 and 30 posts a day on their Facebook pages. Is that what you're seeing?
Mhm.
Okay. Do you have a guideline? Do you have something in particular?
No, I think it depends on the news of the day.
Yeah, well, it does. It can affect it. But also, I mean, if you've got a steady news flow coming out of your organization, then part of what you want to do is kind of time it and you know, play the Facebook algorithm as best as you can figure out how to play it. So, you know, we think, okay, it probably ought to be roughly once an hour. I think that we're averaging about once every 46 minutes or something, but it's, and we have sister news organizations in Memphis and Nashville, and I heard the other day one was at, you know, I think every 54 minutes, roughly speaking, and so it's a continuous trying to figure out what's going on behind the curtain with social media and how to use that as a way to deliver information to the public and connect with the public and develop that kind of engagement. So it's a whole new science that wasn't anything I studied in journalism. But then we were using manual typewriters when I did that.
That's great, and I'm gonna save time to ask a concluding question, but I wanna go ahead and open it to questions from you all, so.
We've talked a lot about how you guys have changed in the past couple of years, but I think for us who are going into the media field, how do you think our job descriptions will change in the next 10, 15, 20 years? Or how do you think the way we're doing it now will ultimately change?
You know, are you talking about from a news gathering perspective?
From a news gather, or for your individual entities or whatever, so.
I think there is like no limit to what could change. I know that some of the networks are doing like virtual reality and stuff that, I mean, we wouldn't even think of using for news. There's no predicting the future, but I think you are gonna see a lot more of the social listening and listening to your viewers and starting that conversation. I think that in TV, there's probably gonna be a push to kind of extend that conversation to television. How that's gonna work?
Well, you're already seeing some of that. I mean, we actually have third-party technology vendors right now that are coming out. And I know you guys test with it, play with it a little bit, where it's vote on is this story important? No, yes,
Yeah.
and you hit something and it's live reporting on video. But I might just interject too, if you want some advice, do it all. There's no such thing as a reporter these days and someone who is a photog. No. It's in a maturing industry, like local, I mean, you hear the term MMJs, they shoot, they edit, they produce, they are the talent, they are the news gatherers. And I think that could be kind of daunting for someone coming out of school right now to say, I have to be a great photographer, I have to be a great videographer, I have to be very eloquent in front of delivering a message in front of the camera. And then going back to the newsroom and editing that story, which is an art, is an absolute skill and something that you can improve on and you should be improving on. really great editors and really great people who can be in front of the camera, and then come back and even, to a degree, you're the one who's responsible for uploading that story to various platforms. And so that is something that I would say, if you're going forward and in that, on that side of the business, of course there's other sides of the business as well, engineering, sales, marketing, what have you, but you absolutely are seeing positions where companies are asking you to do it all.
I would say, I agree with that. I mean, certainly it's to your benefit to learn all of these technical tools. The traditional media business structure is broken, okay? We say that we've been disrupted, and we have been, but the idea of aggregating a mass audience and selling advertising against it, which paid for, built enormous fortunes in the newspaper business and the television business, and that it's like so many other businesses that are in communications and even beyond. I mean, our entire economy is being reshaped by the digital revolution. And so if you're projecting out 10 to 15 years, it's very hard to picture what kind of traditional news organizations might be surviving. And newspapers are maybe viewed as kind of a dinosaur type of publication, and it's very easy to see how they, newspapers were disrupted and are threatened. But traditional broadcast television, hugely under threat. I mean, radio, on and on. There's all of the disaggregation of the audience and the niche communication and the direct marketing and everything that can occur now through digital has really put that whole advertising supported business model under threat. And so there's a lot of change ahead. And I would say that first of all, I'm certainly not going to answer your question of what the future holds, okay? You're going to answer it, okay? The people in this room are going to be the ones that invent what that new world is. But the things I would suggest is that developing your personal brand and being mindful of that is probably really important. And so that however you are delivering news and information to the public or gathering it, you want you and your identity and yourself to be the thing that is kind of irreplaceable and can maybe be translatable onto different types of platforms or different types of technologies. And that involves then developing some level of expertise or authoritative voice that whatever it is that you're interested in. There's a woman in town, I heard about it the other day, who has 160,000 followers on Instagram. What do you think her area of expertise is? You won't guess it anyway. It's an embroidery, okay? So she is completely authoritative on embroidery to the extent that she has, and last I heard, which was like a couple of weeks ago, it's like 160,000 followers. It's probably 165,000 today, and so that there's that ability to take some kind of level of expertise, tie it into your, who you are and how you market yourself through different social media. I think it's going to be an important dimension of what you're all going to be dealing with out there in the marketplace, besides sort of the technical expertise on using the tools.
Yeah.
I have a question. If you guys wouldn't mind, kind of speak to some of the legal or the ethical challenges you may kind of be faced with, or if there's any training, because I mean, sometimes social media can get a lot of
mean ethical as in the information we put out, or just how it's used, or just in general?
You guys.
Yeah.
But how it's used, you have no control over that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think there's certainly, I mean, just from our perspective, and again, it does depend on what you're talking about here. With entertainment, you know, we have a little more leeway in putting things out there, but, yeah, I mean, actually, there was I think there's a lot of interesting dilemmas and just situations that come up through social media. In fact, last week, there was an outsider, and I don't know if it was a virus. They never actually determined if it was a virus or if it was someone intentionally, but they had emailed, or actually, I'm sorry, instant message through Facebook, literally, I think it got up to 100 different TV stations on their Facebook page, but even said, look, have you seen this article that has child pornography? I mean, incredibly sensitive, you know, document. And so what was interesting, you know, no one in our news organization, you know, asked for this or anything like that, but it was just sent as if they were reporting it. And I have no idea, we never were able to ascertain whether this was an intentional, you know, deal, but essentially we had to put out emergency correspondence to all of our social media managers within our company across the country saying, you know, delete and report. Because, you know, there are some people, you know, who engage, and this even engaging, you know, creates a situation where, you know, you're a part of that. And so I think you have to be careful as an organization, and just what is sent out there, because not everyone's nice. Not everyone is ethical in how they do it, so I think we have to kind of be on guard, right? I mean, that's kind of the way I would look at it, is you always have to let everything kind of go through that filter of, you know, is this right? Because things have a way of escalating quickly in social media. I don't know, would you agree with that?
Yes, escalating quickly, yes. Slightly lighter example, not child porn. Something that we use, the softwares that Jack was talking about, CrowdTangle and Chartbeat, is to kind of gauge what people are interested in. But what that means is, if we post one article out of like the 30 that we post in a day about the Kardashians, and it is like the biggest post of the day, and it's all anybody's talking about, sometimes it's a weird conversation to have, like, well, you know, everybody's interested in the Kardashians, but like, do we do more on that? It's kind of just a weird juggling act. Just because somebody's interested in like a weird piece of news doesn't mean that it's the most important piece of news. And a lot of times we do try to kind of like localize or do a story about whatever's most popular with our audience. But trying to remember that what is most popular with them isn't necessarily what we need to be covering is always kind of an interesting conversation to have. And I think that's just gonna get trickier as that kind of stuff is more out there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that it's about traffic on our websites, but we certainly also try to keep in mind that it's about journalism. That's what we do. We're not, we are a particular type of news organization. We are going to remain grounded on our values, and that's where our traffic has to come from, and people are going to have to go elsewhere. And there, you know, I'm sure there's sites, clickbait sites and such that can drive much more traffic, but ultimately we feel like the future will be sounder for us if we stick to our journalism roots. One ethical question that comes up related to the question of personal branding is we do encourage our staff members to use social media to support themselves, to advance their content and such. But every once in a while, I mean, it's I'm sure you're all aware of the issues of tone and propriety on social media, and how you can say something that is misinterpreted or you didn't fully think it out. And we see this happening at all levels, and every once in a while somebody on the national media stage will tweet something, and then they're out of a job, by the end of the day, because it was something that was not, it wasn't stated in an appropriate way for presenting publicly. So that's certainly an ethical dimension of ethics, and it's very strict within our company that you cannot compromise your independence or your objectivity through making public statements about your opinions, okay? And we get reminders all the time from on high of make sure everybody knows not to post anything on their personal social media accounts reacting to something in the news. And the temptation can be great, but if you're acting as a journalist, you want to maintain your credibility, and you want to not compromise your position that might later be thrown up at you or your news organization in a way that will threaten the organization's credibility. You need to be really careful about the opinions that you state publicly. And it used to be, the rule was don't put a political sign in your yard and don't have a bumper sticker on your car. Well, just posting something on Facebook is, probably a much broader broadcast of an opinion than a yard sign ever was. And so that's an area I think to be very careful about.
In like a time where social media just seems so filled and busy with multiple people, multiple sites, other than using your personal brand because other people out there might have a similar brand to you, how do you stay relevant or popular? How do you make sure you stick around for a longer time than the other people?
That's the key question.
Our news organizations are probably also grappling with that. For personally, you probably need to ask a marketing expert, which
Is that what you're referring to? Is you personally as a, or just an organization?
Both ways.
in your organization, I think that what Jack said about staying true to what your organization does and what you stand for is key there. Because even if it's similar to what somebody else does, your audience will recognize that that's your thing, and you'll attract the right people.
Yeah, and I mean, from an individual level, and I always tell any group of students that I talk to this, be very mindful of what you put out there, because when I'm hiring someone, and I hire a lot of people, a lot of young people, I'm like, let's see what James Smith's Facebook page looks like. And I'm always surprised at how many are just completely public. If I were a student, if I have one, I'd have it private, but be careful, because, Facebook and Twitter and all these, Instagram, are, your window to the world, right? And you have to be very mindful of the message that you're putting out there, not only for employers, but like I said, if you get into this field, your viewers. Because the personal brands, there are a lot of anchors and television personalities in our market that have huge social followings of their own. That is 100% theirs. And I know sometimes, news organizations even grapple with that is, do you have a professional account? Do you have a personal account? And who owns the rights to those? I think that's always kind of an interesting discussion. But yeah, I agree. As far as our organizations and how do we stay relevant in an incredibly crowded marketplace, I think we have to be really responsive to our audience. And I think you're seeing that on local news right now. I know ever since I got into the business, there's been a question of, will millennials age into wanting and caring and watching local news? Or does local news need to adapt to content and the distribution model that millennials care about? And I think the answer to that question is still, to a degree, unknown. At what point in your life do you care about the local local taxes that are going to impact you? And there is a point, and so I think it's kind of a blend. I think the answer is somewhere in between. And in this new world where there's just a lot of different places to get information and to be entertained, that we have to be really responsive and serve our audience. And I think all three of us up here with our organizations look at East Tennessee as our audience. Greater East Tennessee, I mean, it's bigger than Knoxville, it's bigger than Knox County. It's actually about 1.3 million people and 530,000 households that make up the greater East Tennessee marketplace. And so our goal is, and downtown Knoxville, right, as an audience is incredibly different than, perhaps up in
Cumberland County.
Yeah, Cumberland County. There you go. And so it's really interesting to see how that kind of plays out. But I think it's our jobs to be very responsive to you and to adapt. And I think you're seeing a lot of that within local news organizations and local media, just in general, is trying to figure out, what do people care about?
I think to speak to it a little bit from a news organization, because that really is, the question you just asked was the question that was on the table when I went to a corporate meeting of USA Today Network editors 2 weeks ago, and that's the fundamental question of competing in the marketplace and how do you do it. And I think a lot now has to be data-driven and a recognition of sophisticated recognition of audience groups and what kind of information do they want, what platforms are they on, how do they want the information presented. And I agree with you on millennials, but even you slice millennials, it may not be, you're not all the same, right? There's different psychographic groups within that where people have different types of interests. And as our news organization has been good for many years at attracting particular types of audience groups, and others have no interest in us at all. And we're completely irrelevant to them. And if we're going to continue to grow and survive, we probably need to find a way to break into some of those other audience groups that that we're not even on the radar with. And I think that within within the business of communications, you find that there's a lot of examination of data and trying to develop strategies that it gets very complicated because of the long-standing culture of your news organization and how you habitually approach stories and the tones that you strike and such. So it's a very important question. That's what I would say. Tough question.
Does anybody else have a question? Yes.
So, Mr. McElroy, before addressing that question with regard to moving forward, how should we, what are the needs in the future? And you said, well, one of the things that's important is to create a brand for yourself so that you can shift from different stations or different organizations. It kind of touches on what you were all talking about in terms of branding. So it is really in that, you have to kind of juggle the two. You want to create a personal brand, but then at the same time, you're working for this particular media organization, and there's some reputation that you have to uphold as well. So do your organizations actually have some sort of training for your employees to give them guidance in terms of how they should juggle it and navigate social media spheres?
Yeah, definitely. I know we do. I'm jumping real quick, but yeah, I mean, it's a big part, right? Because, you know, you're every employee, especially if you're in front of the camera, is an extension of the brand. And so you want that to be consistent with exactly, you know, what the primary message is for the actual brand. I'll speak, you know, quickly to Knoxville Weekend. You know, we have an MMJ who she has probably the best job in the entire station. She does nothing but just find cool things to do in East Tennessee all day long and post multiple stories. Well, she also has her own personal media brands, and we encourage her to, you know, be herself, show personality. And it's a fine line, right? You want to show personality because through video, people connect. You know, you know, sight, it's the old thing, sight, sound, and motion, you know, create emotion. And a lot of times, you know, the reason WBIR has been such a dominant presence in East Tennessee is they've had, on the television landscape, is they've had some really incredible personalities who people love Todd Howell. They feel like they know him and they love him for who he is. And so it's a fine line, right? And so we have to train them to, all of our personalities to say, all right, here's what our message is. We want you to be yourself, but don't go off brand. You know, that's just kind of business. I mean, there's a fine line sometimes, right, in expressing yourself and then also being, as you know, an employee of a company, and you want to help out your company in any way you can.
I think understanding your organization's brand is really key to making sure that you are kind of staying within it personally. If you've ever watched Channel 10, I am positive you have heard the phrase "straight from the heart," which is our brand. And the reason that Todd Howell is so successful is because he is the most straight from the heart person I know. Like, you can't pass him in the hallway without him, like, saying hello to you and asking about, like, your cat, and it's just like, he knows everything about everybody and he's everybody's best friend. And that is straight from the heart. And I think even as a producer, less people are gonna follow me on Twitter than, like, Robin Will Hoyt. But I try to, like, filter what I'm saying as something that doesn't step outside of straight from the heart. This morning I tweeted about my neighborhood has a rooster that wanders around. It's kind of weird. But it woke me up at 4 in the morning this morning, and I tweeted about that. Was that, like, the most straight from the heart? No. But would it offend anybody? Would it, like, step outside of that bubble? I don't think so. I don't think PETA's gonna call me, hopefully. I did not threaten the rooster. But I think staying within just, like, the orb of just your brand and kind of where it fits in is important. And you really have to understand what that brand is to do that.
If there aren't any other questions, what I'd like to do is kind of wrap up our session today. Students who are here for class, make sure you either sign in if you're in 367-411 or you've checked in for your course. If you all would take a few moments to hang out. I know some students are here maybe covering this for class as a story and they have individual questions. But if we could, before we close, just thank our panelists for taking time. Okay. If any of you are covering this and have questions you'd like to, I'm sure our panelists will be open to spending